The Venus Project TeamSpeak Seminar, January 8th, 2012.
Hello, everyone.
Hello to everyone, and thank you for your efforts.
I'll start with this. I'd like to know if you have any more in the input on solutions that the peripheral countries did after their debt collapse, like Iceland and Ireland. They are discussing in Greece and Spain to revert back to their old currencies. If they decide to do that, how would that affect them and the global economy as a whole? Will this really solve the problems created by the monetary system?
No, it will not.
Do you want to expand on that at all?
Yes, you either have to come to a tour here or you have to read our books, The Best That Money Can't Buy. After you've read that book twice, and if you still have questions based on the book, I can answer them. But if you project your own values and you want answers within the system, I can't give you any. I can only give you answers if you utilize the new methods of evaluation. And that is to bring nations together that have a common vision. In other words, you cannot operate anymore as separate nations. It'll produce the same problems over and over again. You have to learn a new method. What is the new method? Understanding the world you live in and the value system of the world you live in. You have to understand communication, what it is, what it means. You have to go through that course first. And once you understand the direction of the Venus Project, then you have to bring people together and meet and discuss chapter by chapter of the book, so you have common understanding of what the book is about. You have to have meetings like resource-based economy. You have to discuss it, what it means and why it's necessary. Once you convince people that the resource-based economy is one of the only means we have of arriving at a saner world, a sustainable world, you cannot arrive at that unless you accept the basic principles. And if you don't accept the basic principles, then you have to ask questions related to that. Say, well, how will that help me turn other people around? You have to do that. We have to declare the earth, I've said this many times, as the common heritage of all the world's people. Then you have to get nations to join together and become one. The more nations you can get joined together by advocating the aims of the Venus Project, not some other direction. Once you attain that, then people will know what to demand. They don't know what to do today. So if you just go along with people making decisions, you'll have the same problems, because they are all victims of culture and they have to learn a new system. Without that new system, the system will not work. The new system is to learn the methods of science and to apply them. That's number one. So you have to meet once a week and discuss every chapter of the book, The Best That Money Can't Buy, chapter by chapter. And once people understand that book, then you can begin to work on social direction.
Okay, can you recommend any good books to learn about the scientific method?
The Best That Money Can't Buy.
Should people watch existing Hollywood-style movies and dramas?
It won't do you any good.
Do you think that music should be extinct in the Venus Project? Will science be the main focus?
Music can be used to help people understand. If you run a nature film, say of birds flying, you have a little bit of music, it helps emphasize certain things. But music of itself, not used in any context, like in a motion picture, you can use music to emphasize certain things. But music of itself can do nothing unless it's used as an assist device.
How far do you take, quote, efficiency? People seem to think that we will constantly update everything without doing things like cost-benefit analysis to work out if the amount of effort and resources used are worth it based on the project's projected benefit?
I don't know what all that means, but I do know this. The more people that know about nature, growing food, the more people that know about industrialization and the reason for cybernetics, the reason for using machines. We want to use machines wherever jobs are boring and monotonous, where they don't teach us anything, where they're dangerous. We can overcome those things by using machines. We don't want people to operate elevators. We can rig an elevator so it stops at any floor. All you have to do is press the button. We don't need people standing in elevators. We don't need young ladies standing behind a counter in a department store. What can I do for you, ma'am? We don't need salespeople. So soon as you take people out of those professions that don't produce anything useful, you produce more efficiency in the relationship between people. Must everything be based upon science? Look, everything you have, your washing machine, your electric light, your automobile, your airplanes, your houses, are all based upon science. There is nothing else. When I say there is nothing else, when you tell a person that plants grow without telling them that they need sunshine, soil, moisture, temperature, they need all those things. They just can't grow by themselves. Neither can a human being grow by themselves. They need exposure to information. They need exposure to nature. They have to understand what their relationship is to nature. They have to eventually learn how to live in accordance with natural law. That means you can't go on an expedition unless you take enough water, food, medical care, whatever you need to survive on that expedition. That's all scientific. You can't go to the moon unless you bring water and food with you, because there's no food and very little evidence of water. Until you perfect those systems, you have to bring food with you. If you have 10 people, you have to bring enough food to support 10 people. For the duration of the period, you assign people to work on the moon. You can't put 500 people on a rocket ship and bring them to the moon, hoping that they'll survive. You do a survey first to see what the moon has or what it needs to support human life. If you don't do that, it won't work. The same with cities. If you build a city in an area where there's no water, where there's no food grown, you're going to develop a problem for yourself. If you have a population far in excess of what that area can support, you're going to have territorial disputes. In other words, all problems are the result of insufficient information. When you gain information, that isn't a regimentation. That's a method of survival. In other words, people think that must everything be scientific? There is nothing else that we know of. By scientific, I mean check it out. If you don't know what that means, if somebody tells you your car can get so many miles per gallon of gas, check it out. Just verify it, that's all. That's all the scientific method means, to check things out, make them verifiable. But if you listen to people who say, if you pray and honestly believe in your prayers, things will work out. Well, when the Christians were being fed the lions, I can assure you that they prayed, but they were not spared. Whenever there's an earthquake, people pray, but a lot of people are killed. A lot of people send their sons to war and pray for them, and they come back in body bags. Prayer does not always work, and if you're honest, it takes an extreme form of honesty to be scientific. Scientific doesn't mean that you follow everything that science advocates. You follow only things that have been verified. That is the scientific method, not following anything anybody says.
You talk about an emergent culture. What determines when things are changed? Are they constantly changed?
Things cannot be constantly changed because once you build a city, you can't change it right away. It will use up too much resources. What you have to do is set aside an allotted time for change. Maybe every year you modify certain areas of the city based upon further research, not opinions of people. Only tested systems that are put to work. In other words, if you advocate a certain system, and if it doesn't work, you don't use it. That's what I mean by the scientific method. The same system applied to different people get different results. So you have to learn what you can apply to certain people with a certain background. If they don't have the background to understand it, you have to provide the background so that they can understand it. You're the one that has to provide that. If you're doing the instruction as to making a survivable community, you have to find out what it takes. If you have 1,000 people in the community, you have to have a water filtering system to make sure that the water is clean. You have to make sure that the soil is rich enough to grow food that's nutrient loaded. In other words, if you don't do those things, you won't be able to work it. So when I use the term scientific method, I just mean to check things out. That's all I mean by scientific method. Is there any other system other than the scientific method? Not that I know of.
What do you feel about cryogenetics today? In your book, you talk about bringing people back. Would you consider cryogenetics for yourself?
The word isn't cryogenetics.
What is that?
It's revival of people that have passed on cryogenetics.
Yeah.
No, it is not survivable.
Sorry.
And that we don't want to bring people back in the future. It's like sending your relatives on a trip to people that are very different than they are. The future will generate its own set of values. They're not interested in taking on people of the past who do not have a value system that's appropriate for survival. Why should they revive people again? Why should you take on relatives that have value systems that are old, obsolete, and do not work? So I do not believe that people will be revived in the future, even though they are frozen and kept that way, so that at some future date, when we cure cancer, we'll be able to cure them and accept them in the new world. It wouldn't work. I'm sorry to say that, but most people would like to live in a world that's sane. But if they're not conditioned to live in a world that's sane, they'll find it very painful. If you don't understand that, if you took your grandmother to Miami Beach and she saw the girls walking around in bikinis with their butts hanging out, she's not going to feel comfortable because she was brought up in a different world with a different set of values. If you go to the Arab culture, they may have 10 wives or 20 wives, depending on what you can afford. They will not feel comfortable in a world that's very different than the way they were brought up. Don't you understand that?
What direct action can be taken or be taken today? Check the website, check how can you get involved. Does it make sense to start building the first city somewhere? Yes, certainly it does. Get it up and running and let the example lead the way. Yes, definitely. If you have the funding to do that, we would be glad to.
You have to learn about the Venus Project and its proposals and its methods of evaluation. If you just build a city, it won't do anything. Even if you build the perfect city that we plan in the Venus Project, it won't work unless the value system changes of the people in that city.
Yes, of course. Who would know and determine who would need to be re-educated to integrate society in a saner way? Wouldn't we need too many people to re-educate them? Is there enough people for that?
You have to have meetings at your home or wherever you have them once a week and discuss the project so that everybody understands the tools of the Venus Project, which you get from the book, The Best That Money Can't Buy. If you read that book, you use that method. That is the method for turning people around.
person is asking, are allowed to translate the book and print it. The best that money can't buy, no, if you're interested in translating it and print it, you have to get in touch with us. You can get in touch with me, Meadows, at thevenusproject.com. We have had several prints of that in different languages. So yes, we are doing that, but you will have to get in touch with us for that. If the benefit of updating a transport system is going to be an extra 1% efficiency, but it will take a huge amount of resources, thousands of hours of work and thousands of people, would it be done?
You're projecting your own values into the Venus Project. That has nothing to do with the transportation system of the Venus Project. It's based upon how many people have to travel, how far, and whether we can do that. And the energy required to do that will be based upon what is available at the time.
Well, he's asking, how often do you update it? If it's only a very small benefit, it takes a lot of time. Yeah, it's kind of strange.
We just don't do things like your projections. Your projections have nothing to do with the Venus Project.
He says, how far do we take efficiency in a resource-based economy? Well, that's not efficient just for updating. The evaluation is not efficient in itself.
That's your own projections. It has nothing to do with the Venus Project.
Who watches the scientists? What prevents them, like the rich people today, from...
Because they are not in a position of differential advantage. Once you do away with the money system and everyone has access to the necessities of life, there is no advantage in taking advantage of other people. It would not serve any useful purpose. Therefore, the pattern of behavior that you consider socially unacceptable will not occur.
That pattern of behavior only occurs in scarcity. The whole directive of the Venus Project is to update society and produce abundance as quickly as possible, so you bypass that type of behavior. There's a reason for that behavior.
When people have access to the necessities of life, they do not steal. You don't seem to understand that. You're always asking questions within the system you live in, and that is not the answers. The system you live in is already distorted and aberrated. We're talking about a totally different system. You can't put 500 people in an airplane and get off the ground if it's designed to carry 100 passengers. The wing area won't support that, so you can't do it. In the system I'm talking about, you cannot do things that you do today, which is considered normal and acceptable. The system of the future is based upon scientific scales of performance. You just don't do things. You do a survey first to see if it's doable.
You said that it's wrong to dress women. Do you think that in the Venus Project, people should all be naked?
You better read the book before you ask the questions, because your questions are completely irrelevant. People will wear clothing in the future that's comfortable. Boys and girls will swim nude when they're very young. That'll do away with peeping toms and fetishes and all the things that you have to deal with today. By changing the conditions that people are raised under, you can eliminate patterns of behavior that are socially objectionable.
What's your thought on the law of attraction, or in other words, the power of thoughts?
I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't. You're talking about things that you've read about in this system, and this system is so aberrated in so many different areas that it's subject to different interpretations.
Okay, I would like to make a YouTube video encouraging people to start the Venus Project political parties in their states, provinces. Do both of you have something to say about that?
If you teach the Venus Project proposals, it's okay. But starting a political party without instruction as to what the Venus Project is about is missing the boat.
Well, I guess if there was a Venus Project party, they would be instructing supposedly their platform of what they're running on.
I don't assume anything.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you what you have to do.
Okay, the main argument for political decisions is that there's not infinite resources. so a process of decision is made to distribute or apply them, would you restrict the use of the things that were insufficient for everyone?
Only during the transition, yes.
If not, who would make decisions about where we would put those resources into action?
If you read our book, you'll find out that no one makes decisions. They arrive at them by testing different methods.
He's saying that the need for politicians, there's not infinite resources.
Well, I don't agree with you. You haven't read our book.
Who would determine how the resources are used?
It isn't who would determine. The question is, how would resources be used? They would be used in any way that benefits people. If it doesn't benefit people, and if there's a lack of material, let's say we actually lack certain materials, then the research labs would go to work on making a substitute material that will work during the interim while we're developing new materials.
I would say, too, that what determines the use of materials is that we already have an agenda set forth. We want to feed, house, clothe, medical care for everyone on Earth. So those are the priorities. The well-being of people and the needs of people and the energy systems that are needed to fulfill those types of needs.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Is there a location in mind for the construction date for the first city?
That is not up to me. That depends on the nations that agree with this direction and agree to sponsor those directions.
We are always working on that, though. We're always working on talking to groups or talking to people in regards to the building of the first city or the film and many things.
And the requirements.
Compared to life in a monetary system, will people be able to express less, equal, or more individualism in the Venus Project?
I don't know what you're talking about. There is no such thing as individualism. When engineers work on a bridge, they use calculations and known materials to put up the bridge. I don't know what you mean by individualism.
What people call individualism is a culmination of what they've been exposed to, the books they've read, their teachers, their role models, their subculture. You're not born with any value system or any particular abilities or any understanding. So it's really picked up in the environment. In the resource-based economy, you will have so much more exposure and so much more opportunity to take part and learn new things that if you call that individualism, your range of behavior and your range of knowledge, then there'll be much more of that. How are we going to handle all the cultural monuments like Stonehenge, Eiffel Tower, and also religious places like Mecca and such?
That would be up to the people and the transition period allotted for social change. In other words, there are many traditions that are detrimental to human beings. Those traditions will be bypassed. The traditions that serve the use and development of understanding will be perpetuated.
What does Jacque know or think about optional technology for creating heat and energy? Is it possible that it would be a better choice over wind or solar plants?
Yes, things will constantly improve and be changed and modified, but they will not be installed every time a new idea comes out. We'd have to set an allotted time for the use of an idea and then install it. It might take a year, it might take 6 months, but you can't install new things every time somebody thinks of something new. It would be impractical for any society to do that.
What diet will be in the cities in the future? Will it include meat? If so,
first, a great deal of research would have to be done on whether the cooking of food destroys certain elements in the food. A lot of work would have to be done before research is decided upon and the methods of food preservation is utilized. A great deal of information is lacking in that area.
Was The Best That Money Can't Buy translated into French? If not, do you consider asking the linguistic team to do it? because I would like to translate it. I think the linguistic team is working on The Best That Money Can't Buy. So I would have to be updated with Ray in regards to that. I'm not sure if it's on hold now, but we'd be glad to have it translated. That would be great into French. In your circular city, wouldn't having hills instead of flat topography increase the surface area, i.e. land available for use?
The design of our cities call for a relatively flat area. We will use hilly areas for different purposes.
Jacque's images of the cities are easily found. What about real blueprints? We do have blueprints, but we don't have blueprints out for the public. What about sharing all the details? Are you aware of the details needed to? Okay. No, we don't have the blueprints and all the details of Jacque's designs out there because the culture is just very abusive and people have taken his work and have patented it. And if that's the case, in many instances, we'd have to pay to use certain things. So when we are ready to build and people are working with us, then we will share the blueprints with them in regards to that.
No, there are many people that can handle a computer. I can only point to direction and invent things to make those directions attainable.
This person says, I don't think you've understand my questions. I've read The Best That Money Can't Buy. The book doesn't exactly say who would determine that a certain person is unsane. How do you determine if people are unsane and therefore needs to be re-educated? How do you determine if somebody needs to be re-educated in the future?
The same way you determine whether a person can get an engineering degree. They have to understand the basic principles of engineering. Everybody is tested to become an architect or any other profession today. You have to answer questions in electronics if you wish to work in electronics. And you can only determine that by putting them to test or testing their methods of evaluation. In other words, how well does the system work? If it works well, we use it. If it doesn't work well, we modify it.
What do you think of neuroscience?
It isn't what I think of, it's how productive it is. If it's productive and works, we use it. If it's not, we don't.
How much material recycled from the old cities, glass, metals, etc., would be used in development in the new cities?
It all depends on the time, the technology available at the time.
Would people be able to keep their current possessions and move them into their new homes, or would everything be recycled?
Most everything would be recycled so that it functions better than the older system. If it isn't any better, it will not be recycled.
Person's asking if we don't have enough money for the screenwriter, why not put the full storyline up on the web available for volunteers, professional screenplay writers, and have the film technical script finished in a collaborative effort? Well, we are working with a scriptwriter right now. We'll just see, actually many scriptwriters. We don't think we want to go that route, just put it up on the internet and work collaboratively. It really takes somebody to understand this direction, and working with Jacque a lot. And this is what we've been doing with scriptwriters. They've been coming down here, going to the tours, meeting with Jacque the next day, discussing a lot of things. So it's really a process that we have worked out that's working pretty good to try and find somebody, and it's coming along well. How much or how little, if anything, will people have ownership of?
Only the things you make. If you're an artist and you make a painting, you will own that. If you're a gem cutter and you cut gems, you can't sell them. You can give them to people you like. But there's no commercial expressions used in the Venus Project. You can give people gifts, but you can't sell things to people.
Ownership is really a burden. I don't know why people would really want to own things, take care of things, have to purchase them again if anything goes wrong, get insurance.
What you really want is the use of material when you want it. You don't want to own the earth. What good would it do you? If you own the earth and you live to be 72 years old, what happens to the ownership? It is an ownership that people need. What people really need is the use of things when they want it. You don't have to own your Army airplanes as long as they work for you. And if they're kept in key condition and they respond as they should, you don't need to own it. You don't need to own anything. This is a very old carryover from the money system.
Jacque, do you understand the concept of quality of life? When our modern purposes of life, such as wealth, have disappeared, how will the Venus Project contribute to this concept of the quality of life?
You have to read the book again. You haven't read the book, and apparently you're not able to extract significance from what you read. Those are old questions, part of the economic system that you're brought up under. They have no validity in the Venus Project.
This person's saying the nations will not agree with this direction. We have to start within governments, surely. South America or Africa, a place no one uses, would be a good place. Once something is begun, more people would join and fund and assist.
You're projecting your own values again. We don't rely on people evolving on their own. They have to be educated.
No, he's saying that, yeah, that's true. The nations will not agree with this direction.
I can't deal with that.
Yeah. We get so many people approaching us who want to do the city in different places, in South America, in Africa. And they're not necessarily governments. We're not really just relying on governments. So we're working with this in many different areas. Could you comment on the idea of majority rules, 51%, deciding on the course of action or implementation of an agenda versus one leader or a small group guiding the agenda direction over the long term after the transition period?
I still don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
In other words, you always have a chief engineer or a chief chemist or a head surgeon. That is a person with a great deal of experience, and they recommend the direction to be taken. In other words, if
in
you
that
want to,
area, yeah.
yes, each person functions in different areas. A bridge engineer designs bridges. He doesn't tell people what to eat. Dietitians do that. And dietitians get their information from statistical studies of food deficiencies and or nutritional deficiencies. A telegrapher or a person that works with electronics deals with electronic problems. He doesn't deal with shoes or clothing. That's another department. In other words, people that are qualified in a given area make recommendations, but they don't make recommendations based on their own opinion. They make recommendations based upon tested systems only.
Also, this person is talking about us seeing the agenda. It's not a small group guiding the agenda. I think people really all want the same thing. As we always state, clean air, clean water, arable land, medical care, a relevant education. And so we're laying out where we want to go. When you have the monetary system, then you have small groups of people usurping the means for accessing resources and dictating to others what their range of behavior will be through the media, through education, because they control all that. So this has nothing to do with that, a small group of people directing this.
Let me say it another way, Roxy.
Sure.
Whenever you go to work for any corporation, the minute you punch that time clock, you're in a dictatorship. They don't ask you what you'd like to do. They assign you different jobs to do. In other words, don't you see that? Whenever you go to work for any company, it's a private dictatorship. Think about it.
Even your education is dictated by how much money you'll get, mostly to determine what kind of lifestyle you have. You don't always study the things you want to study. You study something because you have to have a job and you have to make money. So your life is so restricted. Even your thinking is restricted because you don't get the range of education and exposure in this culture. What you get is just to perpetuate this culture. So in the Venus Project, it would be quite the opposite. And there's nothing about a majority ruling. There is no voting. You don't vote on how you build a bridge. You put certain materials to test. You don't vote on it. It has nothing to do with voting. It becomes a logistical and technical problem to house, feed, clothe, educate, create a high standard of living for everybody all over the world. It's not a voting problem. It's not an opinionated problem. Our problems are technical and logistic in following through the agenda of the Venus Project. Do you want to say something, Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to say, no matter where you are on the planet at the moment, the social and political systems that we have in place either consist of a dictator who decides everything that goes on socially and politically in that country, or it's a government where a group of people are put into position that then make those decisions based on their relationships with big business, etc., etc. So at the moment, you've got this problem with people themselves have no choice in what goes on in their social and political system except for who they choose to take those decisions for them. In a resource-based economy, it would be completely different to this. You would have people working in specific areas of social and political or ecological design, etc., whereby those people with the most experience in those areas have already got the agenda laid out for them, which is the values laid out in the Venus Project. So we've already, as Jacque and Roxanne have said, our values, our agenda is to make sure that people are fed, people are housed, people are clothed, that people have a relevant education, that they live in an ecosystem that's beneficial, that we're not destroying our own life support system, etc. That is our agenda. So if you had personal agendas going on with people, aberrant people in the system, etc., that would be so out of place. It would be spotted immediately, and that would be dealt with through education. That person would be educated to stop thinking like that, to not work in such aberrant ways, and to try and think holistically about how they fit in with their environment and how they benefit their environment and how it benefits them, etc. So it's just a completely different way of looking at things. And that's probably the reason why some of these questions are coming out, is because it's so alien to the current way of delegating our decisions to other people and not having any ourselves.
That's true, Andrew. Thanks. How about violence that is not money related, like jealousy? For example, a jealous guy can kill another guy. How will you handle that since there's no prisons?
You don't handle that. You deal with that when children are growing up very young in school. You teach them how to honestly disagree without getting angry, without wanting to hurt another person. In other words, all that has to do with the raising of children and the value systems you install when they're very young. I always said that during the transition from the monetary system to a resource-based economy, you will have neural lag, or the problems inherited by the old culture. The transition will be painful. I always said that. But when you raise children, you raise them how to relate, how to use language appropriately, how to not get angry, how to not want to hurt anybody, how to not want to kill anybody. We raise children so they don't have those feelings.
This person says, I'd like to hear more about how you changed alcoholics. How did you heal them?
It's always the same system. You raise people so they don't need to dull their senses to understand the world they live in. When you dull your senses, you don't understand as much. When you use drugs, you don't understand. You're really behaving because it affects your behavior. It makes you feel lightheaded and easygoing, but that isn't really sane. The sane thing is to do away with the feelings that generate antagonism, aberrant behavior, or unsuccessful patterns of behavior that do not accomplish a given task. We can train children which are not done at all. We can educate children so they wouldn't want to hurt anybody. In other words, that is the problem. Our school systems don't know how to improve communication. They don't know how to alter behavior. They think that that is human nature. There's no such thing as human nature. You cannot pass on jealousy. You cannot pass on greed. Those are learned in scarcity environments. They're learned in the home where mother pits one child against the other. Why can't you be like your sister? Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you do your homework like your brother does? That is pitting one person against the other. They don't know how to raise children. They don't know how to raise them to be creative and inventive. All of that can be learned. That Leonardo da Vinci was not a born genius. He associated with people that talked of gears and levers. Every futurist in the past had talked to scientists about the future of technology. They don't get ideas by themselves. They get ideas by universal exposure to a broad set of systems. Creativity is based upon experience. A great deal of experience improves your ability to improve upon ideas. But if you're not exposed to many ideas, there are people up the Amazon River that build rafts the same way they did 1,000 years ago because they're not exposed to different ideas.
When you dealt with the alcoholic, I've heard you say, I mean, that was before I came along, but although many of them were still coming to the tours, but I've heard you say you take away their blame first. Is that right?
Well, I don't want to go into that detail. What you have to do with people that have aberrant behavior is give them the advantage of information, of how to use information to improve your life. You have to show them the advantages of that. You have to show them the disadvantages of violence.
And also, starting with how they get their values, how the environment superimposes their values upon them.
Yes. You have to show them how they got to be the way they are, how their insufficiency interferes with their lifestyle. You have to show them what the culture does to people. The culture is a very damaging system if they teach individuality, self-advantageous systems. If they teach that, non-cooperative, but not sharing your values with other people, they hold back the development of society. Patents, inventions hold back the development of society. In the future, all ideas will belong to all the world's people, but there'll be no one that's left out. There'll be no Salvation Army or Goodwill Industries. There'll be no poor or hungry people. There'll be no slums. We get rid of all those conditions that produce aberrant behavior.
Cannot the Hollywood elite or other super rich be persuaded to buy land somewhere? Or perhaps you'd like to sign up with our media team or our PR team and reach out to some of these people and try and contact them and see what you can do. Would people be able to keep their current possessions and move them into the new homes, or would everything be recycled?
Yes, everything would be recycled, and most of those patterns of behavior would disappear.
It seems that lots of people have trouble to understand what basic need is and how that is important. Can you please give examples of the methods to better understand that?
Basic needs: clean water, clean air, an arable land, rich soil. Exhausted soil can produce carrots as deficient in keratin. In other words, you need certain things to grow food. You need people who understand soil chemistry. You need people who understand agriculture. Those would be the people in charge of producing food, not the average person. The average person does not participate in anything, although they believe that they live in a participatory democracy. You never had that because all news is managed. NBC, CBS, all that news is what they want you to hear. You don't get a true global viewpoint. If you did, you wouldn't have wars. You wouldn't have armies and navies. You wouldn't have prisons or police if we understood what shaped behavior. They think that some people are good, some are bad, some are honest, some are corrupt. All that is a myth. Their behavior is generated by the culture they live in.
Do we recycle dead bodies in the Venus Project?
I really can't answer that, but if we learn how to keep certain cells alive, and preserve certain organs, we might do that. If people are educated to contribute in that way. If they're not educated to that, they can't do it.
I know the Venus Project doesn't advocate money, but we live in a monetary system. Doesn't it make sense to do something to make money so we can fund our project? Did you want to say something with that?
Basically, we don't subscribe to the idea of not using money in the monetary system. We all live in it. Everything you do in this system at the moment costs you money, whether it be feeding yourself, housing yourself, whether it be using the internet or having a telephone line or electricity, whatever it is. And even if you're self-sustainable in this system, which again costs you money to do, you need to buy solar panels, you need to buy hydroponic systems, etc., or gardening equipment, etc. So there really is no way to live without money inside of a monetary system unless you want to be at the lower end of the scale in complete poverty. So obviously there's a lot of projects that we want to do that will take money, for example the movie, and we do need funding mechanisms for these. At the moment obviously we've got a donation system going on for the script money to get a scriptwriter to work full-time on the script with Jacque and get the script written. The plan then is to obviously take that script that's been written and take that to various studios and try and get a studio to actually take on and fund and actually develop the movie project. There are other sort of mechanisms that we could use and that we'll be looking into. One of the things that we were looking in for TVP design, for example, was that if we produced something like a Venus Project game, or if we produced something like a certain collaborative software environment that could be used by companies for their own uses internally, project management, things like this, or if we made a game, these could be commercial projects. These are things that we could actually put some commercial value to and help to fund some of the projects that we're trying to get started. So if you've got experience in funding, or if you've got experience in marketing, or if you've got experience in any areas where you feel, business for example, where you feel you could contribute and help to develop up plans for making money to pay for some of these projects, then we want to hear from you.
Thanks, Andrew. Is there a slight chance to get the Venus Project in school? I mean, like a 4 to 5 hour lesson every week. I don't know if we've already tried this. Jacque lectures at universities when really, well, professors or teachers request it. Many of the professors are talking about the Venus Project in schools, we understand, but we haven't tried to push for a curriculum in schools. It's a tight thing. I don't know if somebody would be interested in trying to pursue this or trying to lecture at universities or presenting the Venus Project there, or high schools. This would be great. We have had high school students come here in groups. So join some of the people who are trying to do outreach in the Venus Project and or get involved, the PR teams or the media team, and trying to reach out to schools. We can add this on the list as well. How important of an impact do you think great art and architecture has on people and societies? Do you think functionality, efficiency should always be considered before the aesthetic, artistic factor? I'm asking this because some of the greatest pieces of art and architecture I know can be considered quite inefficient and resource wasting.
It all depends on what you want. Do you want a world without war, poverty, hunger? Then you have to use things intelligently, meaning not wastefully. And if it's wasteful, it hurts a great deal of people. It may please some people aesthetically to have a monument to the soldiers of World War II, but I'd rather take that money that it costs to put up a monument and buy stuff for the Veterans Hospital, artificial legs, MRI machines, X-ray machines, whatever that hospital needs, not a monument.
And the notion of beauty and aesthetics is
Purely conditioned.
Yeah, it's purely conditioned, as Jacque says. There really is no such thing. As I've learned about architecture from Jacque and what's efficient and the efficient use of materials, and say a dome uses the least amount of material to cover the most space, that is beautiful to me. After I learned the meaning of a dome and why he builds domes or other types of structures and how he uses materials, that becomes beautiful to me. And when I see old Victorian architecture that's just for ostentatious waste and to show how much people can afford, that looks old and decrepit and really destructive and self-indulgent. That doesn't look beautiful to me anymore. So your notions of aesthetics will change as you get more educated into the meaning of, yes, and the intelligent use of materials. Have you tried contacting the likes of Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, who are supporters of a rational society? No, we should put them on our list. Actually, we've talked about contacting them here, but we haven't done that yet. We talked about sending them the book, but we haven't. So we do have an ongoing list. If people want to help get in touch with other people, we have a list, and our, I think it was the media team or public relations team are doing that. So maybe you can join us and work towards that. Why is the focus on the project on large quantities of people on the bottom of the pyramid spread around the world? Why the focus of the project is on large quantities of people, okay? Without the resources and possibilities, rather than locally, on those who in the current system have larger arms and reach presentable results. I don't know what the person's asking here. The question is a bit disjointed, so I
Do you want me to read that one, Rob?
Yeah, I don't know really what they're asking.
Okay, what they're saying is the focus of the project is on large quantities of people on the bottom of the pyramid spread around the world, for example, the lower classes, who don't have the resources and possibilities to actually enable the building of Venus Project cities, etc., rather than locally on those in the current system who do have larger arms and reach present to be able to do such things. So in other words, people with money and influence, etc.
We're not restricting to any of those, either those who can do things with money or other people who can't do things. We're really just trying to spread the word about this direction and the benefits of it and introduce people to the Venus Project and what it means, the values, the direction, the designs. And we are trying to get to people who can do things. We're not just trying to spread the word for people who don't have the resources. So we are working in all different directions.
Just additionally on that one, we're not against any particular group or subset of society. Our whole aim is to develop an awareness throughout all levels of society about the Venus Project and about the proposals that we advocate. We're not against bankers, we're not against politicians, we're certainly not against the little folk, people sort of working in big corporations and things like that. It's a completely holistic, egalitarian project that we're trying to get to everybody and get everybody interested in this. So if we do approach people that do have money and influence, hopefully at some point they'll come across and help out. And that goes to the same regardless of where you are in the so-called pyramid of society.
Thanks, Andrew. Monetary value is not the only value things can have. You have emotional attachment to an art piece. How would you keep people from taking each other's unique things if there's no law? Do you want to deal with that?
I try to deal with that every week. People are brought up not to want to hurt other people. They're brought up differently with a different set of values. You keep bringing back all the old monetary system values and want to know what to do about it. The Venus Project tries to tell people that they do not participate in a democratic system, although they feel they live in a participatory democracy. I've said this over and over again because people ask the same questions. I don't like to repeat myself, but I'm going to tell you once again, most of you did not vote for the Vietnam War. Most of you did not vote for the space program. Most of you did not vote for the Pentagon building. You don't participate. That's an illusion. Ask yourself the same question. Did you vote for the highway distribution system in America? Do you vote for the bridges, the design of bridges? You don't vote for that. Do you vote for the output of electrical energy, the building of platforms at sea for drilling oil? You don't vote for any of those things. What makes you think you participate? You're operating under some delusion that this system puts out there to make you feel like you're a participant in the democratic system.
What's it going to take to change someone's values so we can transition to a resource-based economy? It's very hard to talk to some people because they get very upset or mad at certain ideas.
I would say that the system has to break down so that people lose faith in the people they elected, both Democrat and Republicans. When they lose faith in people that they have elected, and they lose their homes, and they lose their jobs, and they can't get additional jobs, that's when you get social change. People do not react until they are threatened by an established culture.
I wouldn't give up trying to talk with people, maybe change the way you approach them to certain people, maybe talk to them first and get some idea as to where their values are so you can reach them from where they are. A lot of times people read many books, then they try and approach people like the other people have read those books too, but they haven't even read the first books. So you have to kind of think about where you were before you started being exposed to these ideas and try and approach people in their terms. We know that nothing will be forbidden in the future because it will go underground. The same goes for alcoholics and smokers. They're taught not to use and shown the disadvantages of that. Well, let me just read this. But what if they don't want to quit smoking and drinking? Will any measure be taken? And will the production of cigarettes and alcohols continue?
If there's no profit in it, it will not continue. You can only make money by paying off politicians, by paying off certain people to carry out your wishes. But if there's no money in the system, you can't introduce those things. You can't sell drugs if the system doesn't utilize money. You can't have a prostitution establishment if the system doesn't use money. You can't have gambling if the system itself has outgrown the use of money. So I would say that the monetary system of itself is basically corrupt.
What about those people who want to smoke and drink? Would that continue during the transition?
Where do you get the cigarettes from? What do you give them for cigarettes? What do you give them for cancer sticks? Cigarettes and frankfurters and artificial preservatives in food are responsible for many human ills. They will not be available in the future. You couldn't even buy junk food because no one will produce it. And if they did produce it, they couldn't sell it because there's no money. They have no incentive to want to give up smoking if they're not educated. They have to be educated to the disadvantages of smoking, not only for themselves, but their children and friends and associates. When you smoke in a building, it gets into all the fabrics and everything else. The people of the future will be brought up not to want to do that. Don't you see that we honor the king because we're brought up to honor the king? We respect the church and the ministers of the church because we're never given any other point of view. We're not given the theory of evolution in schools. We're not given the multiple value systems. On Sunday, you have religion. You don't have what different people believe all over the world. You don't live in a democratic society. If you did live in a democratic society, you would have all religions on the air. What different people believe all over the world. You'll have what people don't believe, where people are atheists, agnostics. You'll have every point of view in a democratic society. If you just have religion on Sunday, it means that you don't live in a democratic society.
I already was a psychology student, and when I met the Venus Project, is not my idea to fit people into the system established. Do you consider that a job can be done to raise awareness, to bring about change in mindset, pointing to the transition from social psychology, from the institutional socioanalysis?
Yes, I think you can do a lot of good. If you get your PhD in psychology, you can inform people as to newer approaches and better approaches than the ones established in the monetary system.
Do you have any technology for the first city, or only designs and ideas, or only designs for such technology?
No, we have specific methods of operating the city, building the city, the design for materials and how to use them wisely. We go into all the details necessary to build a new social system.
I guess that's it for this week. So we really appreciate you coming and listening and everything that you're doing to help spread the word for the Venus Project.
Yes, this is so. Again, we cannot thank you enough, even for the questions you ask. But most questions are not really well thought out. They're within the system. They're the kind of questions that are raised in a monetary system. If you raise children to share ideas with one another, rather than outdo one another, outperform one another, if you raise them to be competitive, you're hurting people. This is what the message is all about. We do not raise people to be competitive. We raise them to share ideas, share knowledge. This is how society grows, by sharing ideas, not keeping them private.
Okay, we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jacque and Roxanne, again. Great Q&A. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Same again next week.